The Binding Spell by Jonathan Thomas Jones. Read by Jonathan Thomas Jones. He thanked Alodon, the sky god, as he sat in his throne. It was immense and beautiful. He had fashioned it from pieces of stone cut from all of the lands he had previously conquered. Each piece had been meticulously decorated with the primary resource of its respective region: mithril from Gonton, diamonds from Kalhar, dragon scales from Relfheim, and treasures from every other country he was aware of. It was his ultimate trophy. It clearly displayed his ownership of the known world. There was nowhere left for him to invade, yet his work was only halfway done. "King Provian," one of his knights called from the doorway of his grand audience hall. "We've retrieved the one you requested." The king smiled. Everyone was so compliant. He had demonstrated his preternatural strength on the battlefield enough times that no one dared cross him. His own servants and guards were especially fearful of his brutal punishments. He had made examples of many. "Excellent work, Savalos," Provian complimented. "Bring her in and have a boy fetch Daco from his tower." At his request, the knight moved with great haste through the tower. He would carry out the orders without fail or falter. That was the greatness of King Provian I. He was unquestionable. As he waited for his two guests to be brought to him, he thought back to his childhood. He had never known his parents, as they had died during the Plague of Mists, when he was too small to recall their faces. After that, his parents had been the street and the sky, which symbolized his freedom. His brothers and sisters had been the other orphans. He had spent his days stealing, fighting, running, and more often than not, planning the orphans' daily activities. They had done well under his lead, and they had given him his first taste of rulership. They knew they would all benefit from his mind, but he had never held any illusions of loyalty beyond the bonds of necessity from them. Only one person had ever shown him kindness, a girl named July. Her parents died in the same plague, but she was foundling, taken in by parents who loved her as their own. She was the one who held his hand and kissed at his wounds when he needed comfort. They had even found a priest of Alodon to secretly marry them with a binding spell. They wanted to be together forever, and his street fight winnings made that a possibility. He had beaten every brawler the town could produce against all odds, and the purses were as big as they could get. He would buy a house with some land and live well with his bride. That was before he won a fight against the king's nephew. He was arrested for beating a member of the royal family bloody and sent straight into the gladiatorial pens. He enjoyed the work there. It was the same work he had been doing his entire life. The only problem he had with it was the absence of July. The fighter could feel her spirit through the spell, and it kept him alive during times of inactivity. The problem was that he wanted to feel less during battle. He had to meditate for long periods of time to eliminate his emotion and give in to cold, tactical calculation. That gave him the ability to win and indulge in the slaughter. Provian soon began to relish the life, and even carved out a comfortable existence. He had to keep his emotions at bay, though, because every friend he made was destined to die in the arena, just as he was. He watched comrade after comrade meet his end in the arena, but Alodon had protected him, as he screamed his victories into the sky. Then one day, Alodon granted his servant the greatest of boons. He freed him with a great storm that culminated in multiple lightning strikes that burned his prison down. He and his fellow gladiators escaped, and slaughtered those who would call them slaves. It didn't take long for him to reach his old village after that, but July was gone. His old orphan friends, however, were still there and prospering. Based on his old strategies and plans, they had built a vast underground network that allowed them to rule over various areas from the shadows. Not a single one of them was resistant to his orders when he returned. Provian led them in rebellion, and coordinated such effective campaigns that he was king in a matter of months. He loved the feeling of power, and the act of conquering became an addiction to him, so he began invading. He wanted to rule the world, All glory to Alodon, all courtesy of his cold and calculating demeanor. It was always strategy before emotion. His strategies were unparalleled and his skill unmatched. There was not a single man in the known world, or even four together, who could best him in combat, and many tried. For several years, it seemed as though every day of his life was marked by the death of a challenger. He could have named the days of the year after his dead opponents many times over. It took him 4 years to become king of the world, but it had been 10 since he had last seen his beloved July. Now that he had no more to conquer and much to maintain, he felt as though it was time to see her again. He had set many to the task of finding her. It had taken a few weeks, but his wait was finally over. His recollections were shattered by the arrival of Daco, his loyal vizier and wizard. He was a shaky man, nervous at all times, but always ready with a mouthful of knowledge and praise to Alodon. Provian often wondered if the wizard feared him that much, or if he had simply been born that way. Either way, the king liked the man. His usefulness seemed endless. "You called for me, my liege?" the vizier stuttered as usual. "Aye," the mighty king answered, "for we have finally reached the day we have been waiting for." "She is here?" Daco asked, looking around the room in a nervous manner as if he thought he might have missed something. "The guards escort her from the gates as we speak," Provian explained. "I expect you will be able to study the nature of the binding when she arrives." "Yes, my lord," he answered as he nodded his head so powerfully the king thought it might fall right off. "I believe the answers we have found will still suffice." Good. It only took a moment longer for the guards to arrive with their guest in tow. "Provian!" she squealed joyfully before her presence could be formally announced. She couldn't resist running to him the moment she saw him sitting on his ornate throne. As she impulsively ran to him, he raised a hand to prevent the guards from stopping her. He stood as she leapt upon him in a great embrace. Solid as stone, he caught her without so much as quivering. It would have looked no different had she done the same to a centuries-old oak tree. He wrapped his powerful arms around her and smiled. She looked no different from their time together 10 years before. He could feel the now unfamiliar feeling of butterflies in the pit of his stomach. She was truly his weakness. "I denied the possibility, but it is truly my Provian that has become king of the world," she said as she put him at arm's length. "Yes," he replied. "I was put to task by Alodon himself. I simply desired its completion before finding you, my love." "I am happy that you have," she said gleefully as she kissed his lips. He put her down and looked into her eyes. "I hear that much has changed for you as well." "Yes," she answered as her smile faded and her glance met the floor. "My parents arranged a marriage with Lord Shindir to enhance our house's standing." "Indeed," he replied coldly. "Can you annul the marriage, my love? We have not borne any children, and my parents would approve of my union to you," she offered, her eyes and tone full of hope. "So your love for me has not faltered over the years?" he asked. "Nay, my heart could never belong to another." She spoke with conviction, and he found that he believed her. "That is good." He looked behind her and snapped his fingers. The guards who had escorted her into the room quickly ran out of the door. "They will deliver the news of your annulment post-haste," he explained. He had to keep the joy off his face when he thought of how completely Lord Shindir and his estate would be removed from existence. "I have felt you all these years through the binding," she said, reminding him of something important. "Do you still love me as you once swore before the Sky God?" "More than you could ever know," he replied as he opened his arms to invite her into another deep embrace. She happily complied, and he looked to Daco over her shoulder. The twitchy vizier nodded and then turned away. "My love for you shall best eternity in terms of length, July," he said as he drove his long dagger through her ribs into her precious heart. She jerked awkwardly and offered little struggle against his grasp. She merely breathed as deeply as she could before letting out a single sob. My love for you shall last even longer, my sweet Provian, she whispered before giving into the darkness. He held her for a long while, aching from that which he had to do. All of her pain had piled on top of his own through the quickly diminishing binding spell. He looked at her eyes, which had only a moment ago been filled with love for him, and wept for the first time since he had been a newborn babe. Now there was no one in the world for him to love. The binding spell was no more, and he would never believe claims of love from another. He might marry in order to produce an heir, to continue his legacy, but he would never love again. All he felt was cold, as her warm body covered his hands and spilled onto the floor. He could continue his reign free from the shackles of emotion. He would crush any challenge that appeared to him with cold calculation. He would be feared for the rest of his days as the uncompromising King Provian Sky held. All glory to Alodon. The end.